He does say on Skype that you should tell people you're recording for legal reasons. So, for legal reasons, this program is being recorded in front of a live studio audience, as ever, of no one. Mark Wilson's managed to get Skype working, which you presented a whole national radio show yesterday from last week from your bedroom. So, to get a webcam working, people will be able to see this as well. This is like the return of Dirty Den.
What are you saying? What are you saying?
don't put your finger in your mouth. I'm
delighted. Unlike Gary Anderson, my broadband is actually working today. It didn't work the other day, which was quite troublesome. So I'm quite pleased. I'm using my son's laptop, and he's showed me how to work it all. So yeah, I'm quite happy. Good to see you boys.
Well, it's good that you put in this time to good use.
Yeah.
Oh, mate, I've been working out. I've been painting, I've been painting, and I've been doing a bit of painting.
I understand you're going to try and qualify for the PDC Tour next year.
I've got an average of 55. Actually, hit 56 yesterday, so I should be somewhere. Yeah.
I mean, the BDO might not be around by this point next year, but you could try for that as well.
I think you're in there, aren't you, with an average like that at the BDO?
Yeah. I'm a little bit jealous of you boys. Richard's sat in his garden. You've got the sun beaming down on you. I'm in my daughter's bedroom, hidden away, hiding from the dog.
340,000 people apparently watched the darts on Friday night.
Did they?
Yeah, which is ridiculous. Some sports would kill for those numbers, just in general, let alone people watching on the internet on dodgy webcams, people playing darts. But there you go.
And how clever has Hearn been in opening up this tournament? He's created a tournament at home, made it free to air, got everyone's details. You had to log into the PDC TV. You don't have to pay, but you've got to log in. And all of a sudden now he's got all these extra people he can target when he comes back to sell tickets to.
340,000 new people. Brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
And a sponsor. Granted, one of his existing sponsors is already sponsoring the Premier League, but that'll be back later in the year at some point. We're going to upset everyone now by starting the Rugby League podcast talking about darts. But as we know, there's no Rugby League to talk about at the minute. But plenty of things have been going on.
There certainly isn't any Rugby League to talk about from Todd Greenberg's point of view.
No? Well, let's work back chronologically then. That was the big news this morning. We've got loads of messages on Twitter. We'll come to those questions later, and I'm sure we'll cover some of them as we talk. But there you go. The big news is Todd Greenberg has left his role as the head of the NRL, the primary league of World Rugby League, primary division, the competition that everyone strives to be like. But he's left. Phil, why is that? What's happened?
I think he's the first of a series of administrative casualties that I think will be in both hemispheres. Partly a cost-cutting measure, clearly. Partly because his contract was due for renewal at the end of this year anyway, and I think he'd already got the feeling that the general I think mood amongst the NRL clubs was because of the waste of money that they perceived there to have been at headquarters. He probably wasn't going to get that renewed. I think also Channel 9 had made it clear that they weren't a keen fan of his, and obviously they're going to be negotiating for a revised, if not a new deal, in a not too distant future. So I think he is something of a fall guy. When you look at his record over the last 4 years, the game has expanded. It has managed to, I think, draw down some riches. How it's spent them is another question. How much of that has been kept in house rather than put into a reserve for a rainy day, which we are now all suffering from, irrespective of the actual weather itself. I think his reign will be reviewed quite favourably, but it's just at that point where he is the sacrificial lamb, and I suspect that similar will happen over here in the future at some point.
Well, you, Mark, last week on your show on TalkSport 2 spoke to Ralph Rimmer, head of the Rugby Football League, who I think, as we've all said, has been very statesman-like during this whole mess of a situation we're in at the moment. And he spoke well again about the situation, and his stock appears to be rising, having had plenty thrown at him in the past few years since taking over that role.
Yeah, he also told me he'd been speaking regularly to Todd Greenberg. Todd obviously failed to mention this. He was on about the Ashes at the end of the year, which he still hope will go ahead. Time will tell on that one. Yeah, look, I think from what I'm hearing, from people I'm speaking to, Ralph's been seen to be doing a very good job. And Phil mentions there might be changes here that are needed, and you wonder what those will be. And a lot of people are coming out now and saying, look, the two groups are working more closely together than they ever have done before. I think that's a good thing, but I'm with Phil. I think what it will mean ultimately is that there'll be a reshuffle somewhere and maybe not enough room for everyone.
So that was Monday's big news story. Sunday, and it's the return of Callum Watkins from the NRL, not in the happiest of circumstances, and that's on and off the field. And it looks like he's heading to Toronto, thanks to the fact that their players have taken a wage cut and they've now got some salary cap space, which I'm not sure is how this was supposed to happen. But Callum Watkins on the way back, I guess he's good for him and good for the competition.
I think it's great for him because he's linking up with the coach where he felt the most comfortable and had the most success. So if he's fully fit now, having had a full pre-season in the NRL, he's a really valuable asset to Super League. I think as well, at his peak, he's a great player. He's a current England international. He's the kind of personality you want in our competition. As for who could afford him at the moment, it's the best and the worst time to be coming back. Clearly, he'll be taking a pay cut from what he was on in the NRL and probably what he could have earned if he was coming back from having finished his stint in the Gold Coast. But needs must. Sad circumstances, obviously, that his dad's ill. And nobody has any money to spend at the moment because they don't know how long it's going to be without generating any revenue. But an opportunity for the Wolfpack perhaps to reorganise their financial roster, to realise that not only do they need players, but they need to probably readjust the players that they've got to accommodate an incoming player. A centre partnership of Ricky Lutelli and Callum Watkins makes them a very, very dangerous beast if that is where he ends up. And I don't have a problem if other players are taking a step back to bring someone in who's going to enhance the squad. Well, in some ways, that's exactly what the salary cap's about. So I don't have a problem with, they couldn't afford him and now they suddenly can. It's a terrible situation where everybody's making the best they can. If we can get Callum Watkins back into our competition, brilliant.
The one thing we know about Toronto, Mark, is they certainly need to bring in quality, and Watkins is quality.
Oh yeah, undoubtedly. It's a shame for him it hasn't worked out. I mean, obviously, he got injured and it's just not really worked out for him, the move. I mean, firstly, we should say up his dad's going to be all right. It's terrible times and we've seen it all the time. So that's the first thing. Where's he going to play? I mean, you mentioned Philly playing. So what about Chase Stanley? Is he still at Toronto? Have I missed something while I've been painting? I mean, they've got three, probably the best centres in the competition, and bring the two is going to be an interesting fit. Maybe Lutelli, who I understand is on a lot of money, maybe he might be on the move. I don't know. Is this the start of a merry-go-round? They needed some players in, and as good as Callum Watkins is, I think he's great, and I'm with you. I think playing under Brian McDermott's brilliant. Is this the player they needed? I'm not so sure it is.
If they're playing 7 games a week, then they're going to need as many players as they can get. I think the other thing is, at the moment, we're probably going to be under threat from the NRL. If they start first, then if they come in for some of our players, and Blake's always played that down and said it's all very well that anyone who's out of contract or not playing can be a short-term gain for their competition. The fact is that none of our clubs are cashed up at the moment. They're all desperate for money. If anybody came in and offered a really serious fee for any of our players to go to the NRL, they are fair game at the moment. So to have one of them coming back, where they'll fit in, where they play, when they play, who else is in the squad at the time they play, do you think it's a good capture for Super League at the moment?
So therefore, have Toronto been pretty cute, really, by getting the reinforcements in first?
Absolutely. That's what I think, yeah.
Yeah.
They've seen someone who's available and went, whatever it takes, wherever he plays. It's the old Liverpool principle, isn't it, in football? It doesn't matter where a guy plays. If he's on the market, we need to get him. And Watkins has even played in the second row a little bit. So I don't think they'll find any problems. Even Chase Stanley at loose forward. There's plenty of options for them. They just need more quality players.
I do not want to see Callum Watkins playing in the second row. Never. It were a waste at Leeds when they did that. He's a centre. Get him in the centres. Let's see the best of him.
We have no idea
for England.
Yeah, it is.
We'll talk about England in a minute, but just finally on Toronto for the moment anyway. There's a chance, I guess, with all the hype surrounding Sonny Bill Williams at the start of the season, that the people in Toronto who paid for their season tickets may never get to see him live in person, because we've got no idea what's going to happen with international travel and what's going to happen with the future of Super League. let's hope they do get to play games abroad. But I guess the good news for Toronto is they are based over here and they will be able to resume their season whenever we resume, even if it means they don't play a home game this season.
I think there's some things that we just can't answer at the moment. And one is what governments individually are going to do and when they're going to do it. And one is clearly the Canadian government and the travel restrictions that they impose. The other is the French for both Toulouse and Catalan, although it seems as though very, very early stages of a lockdown finishing over there, which is going to mean greater ease of travel. But you just don't know whether they'll want players flying out or flying in on a regular basis at this early stage. So I think all of that is irrelevant at the moment. That's all the stuff that we can't answer. At some point, somebody is going to have to decide how we restart a truncated competition and involve teams that play overseas. And it may well be, as Brian Noble suggested in his current column in Forty20 magazine, out now, don't miss it, that perhaps those two teams will need to be exempted from relegation in 2020 because they may not be able to complete their season. So the debate is, what do you do for this year, bearing in mind we don't know if and when and how it can restart, and what do you do moving forward? And I think it's almost the case for writing off overseas teams in however we restart the competitions this year.
Well, we've covered Robert's question by asking about Callum Watkins, so that's that one covered. We'll come to a couple of questions now because they do involve relegation. Toby says, if you're to expand the league to franchising for next year, how many teams would you have in? Who would they be? And would you have any requirements such as attendances or stadium facilities to qualify? Stephen said, do the lads think Rugby League will come out of this crisis a better sport? Is no relegation this year and when the season begins again? And Don was asking, where do we see the game in 12 months' time? I don't know where we see it in a month's time, to be honest, but it does seem to be that no relegation seems to be something that would make sense for this year at least. But does that mean you still have promotion and extend the Super League in 2021 and having no idea what the Super League is going to look like in 2021 or what sport's going to look like in 2021?
I don't think there can be relegation. I think you're going to have a real problem with the Dragons. I don't see with the travel at the minute and the problems that France are having. I don't see when they come back in, even if we start here. The beauty of Toronto is at least they are here and could play a lot of their games, albeit not in front of their own fans. But I think if you said to them, you're guaranteed to be in next year, I think they would put up with that short-term pain, long-term gain for them. But I don't think you can pull the drawbridge up because, if you're Derek Beaumont at Lee or you're the Toulouse owner and you say, well, we've invested a lot of money to get promotion this year, we've got to be given the right to get that promotion. I think you've got to give them the right. So I think we'll have an expanded, I think it'll only be by one. And I think what that does then, it gives them the option to have no relegation again next year and still allow another team to come in to get us up to 14. And I think by not removing relegation and therefore being seen to favour Toronto or Hull KR, whoever's down at the bottom, I think it does allow the competition to expand, and I think that will be the right thing.
I think the issue about relegation relates directly to finance, and I think every team has budgeted for a certain number of games this year. And quite rightly, one of the things that Ralph's been talking about on a regular basis is maintaining the integrity of the competition. Well, if you can't play the requisite number of rounds that everybody has planned for, then the integrity of the competition is not to relegate anybody. I think that, by a business model, you say to Hull KR, you're going to lose potentially half the revenue you can get in this year, but we're still going to have relegation. That's not fair. Toronto's another issue. They've not taken a single penny of central funding. They run the risk of losing 10 home games with 10,000 fans in them. So all of that income, which was going to compensate for not having any central funding, that's not denied. That's then denied to them this year. Again, you've got to look at how that impacts on the team in this season, and I think to throw relegation into that mix as well, these businesses will never start again. So I think you do actually need to look at how you want to emerge from this, and it might be more important that all the clubs are as stable as they can be in this environment, and you tell them now that they don't need to risk budgeting for sometime next year where they're not in Super League. So I think relegation, the longer this goes on, has to be taken off the table. I don't think that favours anybody. I think that helps every single club that is currently in Super League but can't generate any finance. I think the other thing is a really interesting one about what you were saying about promotion, and that is, again, if Toulouse can't be part of this for a significant time, then how do you have promotion if one of the chief teams that possibly could have gained it can't be part of it? Do you do it on the basis of the fact that this year we will look at a franchise model for promotion? So play as many games as you can, get to the point where you've got the best team who could possibly go up on the field. But do you then factor in at some point a team that hasn't perhaps been able to get onto the field at all or as much? And how would they get promoted? What conditions would we put on promotion in its widest sense? So all of these debates are all theoretical at the moment. I think you can get... What I would say is that talking about structures and clubs is probably the wrong way to look at it at the moment, because we don't know how we're going to emerge from this. And it could easily be a very big club that's going to struggle more than a very small one. So I think you look at structures as a general thing. You look at individual clubs in a year's time when we know what strength we've got left in the game. We talked about this a lot. You never really get the chance to sit down and decide what your sport wants to look like in 3 or 5 years' time, where you think you're going. You have a reality check maybe about where you are, what you want to achieve. All of this is sort of doable now in a situation like this, that you can say it's not about what's happening today. That's sort of been taken out of our hands. But what do we want it to look like tomorrow or the day after tomorrow? And the debate then becomes who can be a full-time team at the end of all this, and it might not be the teams that currently are, and who benefits being a community-based team or a part-time team. And I think those two areas are as far apart as they've ever been, and this is a chance to recognise that and come up with some kind of a structure that recognises and rewards both of them.
Nicholas, in Toronto, are there any clubs at League One or Championship level in real danger of going under? Could this affect the league structure in the future in terms of the number of divisions and the teams in each? I mean, as we all know over here, structures change quite often in the last 30 or so years. So in fact, since going to 2 divisions, I guess we've had 3 divisions at times, 2 back to 3 again, fully professional at the top level since 1995. We have no idea what's going to happen. And there would be a suggestion, perhaps, that clubs who don't have high numbers of staff, who have lower overheads, don't have the costs, perhaps, as some of their rivals in the same division, they're probably going to come out of this situation in a better position than those who do have higher overheads and are having to work out how to balance those books and juggle everything at this moment in time.
Yeah, I thought that, with a furlough scheme, let's be fair, a lot of the lads lower down under Super League don't earn a lot of money, do they? So that furlough scheme may well look after those wages, but it is going to be interesting how they come out of it, and how they restart their competitions, etc. And what is the purpose of League One moving forward? We keep talking about the big picture Super League-wise, or that big picture would affect what happens further down the food chain. I think this is going to be a very interesting time, and I think it's funny that we look at some of the teams and we often criticise them for not spending salary cap, etc., but living within their means. And I think, like you said, Rich, I think those teams will come out of this the better. The teams that will be worried are teams like Hull, I would have thought, and Wigan, who are paying big rent to play in a stadium now that they can't use. I'm presuming they're still paying that rent, and basically just losing money every day that a game isn't played. So I think the bigger clubs, I'm with you, I think are in more danger here than the so-called smaller ones.
I think lower down the league, the model of people like Coventry, again, who mainly play for appearance money, which clubs like rugby union clubs, senior clubs are looking at the moment, about restarting on that basis. I think those are towards the lower end may well become closer to a community-based game. Those at the top end that emerge economically sound, they'll be looking for something else out of the sport. I don't think it matters about clubs at the moment. Some will unfortunately have to look at where they sit in the future and may well fall by the wayside purely because they are too fixed cost base, and that may well include some of the bigger names. But what we do know is the game will continue in some form. Confident of that because of the fact that it is a tight and relatively small cost sport. I think it will get some government funding on the basis of the fact that the work it's done in the communities is seen to be valued at the moment. If there's anything good to come out of a pandemic like this, it's that people revert back to being community first, and I think that is our great strength. But also on the back of that, clearly this particular government here has got some kind of responsibility to the towns of the north of England. They made them promises at the last general election, whether that be the northern powerhouse or looking at regenerating economies up here, that through rugby league they can deliver on some of that relatively cheaply. So I think as a sport we could be in a worse position, but it's far too early to say where each individual club is going to sit in that pyramid, and if indeed it will even be a pyramid. What I do think we need to do is stay very tight where we are, but this is also a case for saying that if you just exist in the markets that you always exist in, when something like this happens, you are vulnerable. So for the strength of being in your community, what you might be left with is a very restrictive minority sport. It's a real wake-up call for everybody that every business at some point has to have a policy for expansion.
Dom's asked us a difficult question. This is one which made me to go away and write down and then come back. And he says, given how things are currently, the game is going to need to change going forward. If you had a blank canvas, what structure would you use?
I think the one that I think is growing in credibility is one that I know Phil's mentioned quite a lot, and we have on the show, is the full-time, part-time. I think that's got to be the first cutting point of how the game goes forward. And once you know how many full-time teams you've got, and possibly how many you want, and when I say how many you want, are we approaching clubs saying we would like you in Newcastle in League One at the minute? It's going to take them 2 years minimum to get into Super League on the field. Why waste 2 years? If we want them in, let's get them in. And I think we need to ascertain how many clubs we want to be in our professional league, and I think that then determines the makeup of said competition.
I also think you need to decide how many rounds you want to play, where you actually see yourself fitting in the sporting calendar, which again might determine, your league structure. We need to get away from the idea that it has to be home and away. Every club has to play each other home and away. If that's going to give you too many games, then the amount of rounds you play doesn't necessarily have to be commensurate with the number of teams that you have in a league. I think we need to reinvigorate the international game because that's where we'll break out quicker than the domestic game. And we also need to upgrade the Challenge Cup because at the moment it is a sideshow. But as we saw when the BBC put the vintage finals on the other week, gets a really big audience. People tap into that part of the sport that is resonant still, and all of that should be in the mix. Now, how you put that together, I think you firstly got to decide when you want to play. So if it is the end of March to at the early part of October, and you want to build in an international mid-season window and you want to put internationals at the end as well, and you want to have a prestigious Challenge Cup final, you've almost got a structure there that determines itself. So I don't think, it's not about how many teams and how many games. It's about the philosophy of what you want to be and how you want to look.
We have all watched the sport in the winter and in the summer. I've seen some people say we should go back to winter, and this is a perfect opportunity to do so. One of the problems with that is a problem we might be facing in the next few weeks and months, in so much as that football, you may have heard of it, has to come back at some point. They want to get their season done at all levels professionally, especially Liverpool and Leeds United fans who want to see it back ASAP, which means there are going to be plenty of professional football matches being broadcast by Sky and BT pretty much 24 hours a day. If they could play a game at 1 a.m. in the morning to fit them in, they will fit them in. And we have to fit our games in as well. We'll talk about the pay-per-view thing in a moment. We've got to be smart, though, about how we do reintroduce rugby league, because you can't just, as with any sport, you can't just say, right, we're playing on Friday, lads, and come back in straight at full pelt.
Yeah, look, football's going to be on every day of the week. And I won't be surprised if football's not on at 5 o'clock on a night and at 7:30 on a night, 2 games a day every day, and Saturday, Sunday it'll be on all day, I would imagine. I think something I saw that said they're going to try and complete the league season within 5 weeks. I think there's 9 games left. So that's a lot of football in a very short space of time, and I think they will pan it out where it's all on the TV. I think that's certain. So we're going to come straight up against that, and that's the thing. We've got to decide where we pitch ourselves against, not against football, because that will always take priority. But if we are going to maximise our audience, which we need to do, I'm with you. We need to be cute on that. Do we all play at different times, or are we all going to do what we normally do and everyone plays on a Friday night and all compete with each other? I think we need to really look at that, and I think that's something the sport needs to look at as well.
I think there's a couple of things as well. French Rugby Union, which is the money master in this hemisphere, is already looking at moving to summer. So I think, we've got to be aware of what other sports are thinking of doing, and how we would respond to that, because you can rest assured that if all the big name players are playing in their competition, other competitions will look to follow suit. I think we also, need to look at how we restart the competition, which is a problem that every sport is going to have. It looks as though, again, looking at New Zealand as an example, and perhaps even France, that we're not going to suddenly rush back to having crowds of people in stadia very quickly. So we are going to be starting to finish the 2020 season probably behind closed doors. Now, what implication does that have for a sport like us? That's not the same as football or the NRL. The bulk of their money comes from television and honouring those contracts, and whether a spectator is in the stadium or not doesn't really affect the amount of money that goes to the clubs to keep them going. We have a much different model here, whereby a lot of the game day generated income is what actually keeps our clubs going. So it's not quite as simple as just saying as soon as we're allowed to play, we play. It's under what conditions do we play, and how do we make money when we do play? Because merely playing, putting the players at risk and maybe even compromising the competition might not be the answer. I suspect that we're going to get some return to retail in very limited areas a lot sooner than we are leisure provision coming back in the manner in which we're used to having it. So all of that almost is taken out of our control until the government decide when you can have a crowd and how big that crowd can be. That will determine economically whether we should start and how we should start. And I think you're right that it's in some ways it's almost like saying if football wants to start first and they've only got, 9 games, maybe played over 5 weeks, perhaps they should play out before we even think of starting again. We've got the issues with quite a lot of our clubs share their stadia. So, logistically, how would Wigan and Huddersfield and Hull even get on the field while football's playing? So, and if we are trying to create a little niche for ourselves where we maximise our audience, and that will come back in discussions about pay-per-view, who's actually going to watch it other than us? Maybe we need to pick a section of the calendar where football is going from the end of one season to the beginning of another. So all of that has to be taken into account. But I think you're right. We're not going to be rushing back anytime soon because we've other considerations, including whether playing behind closed doors suits a sport like ours.
Well, Stephen said about getting the Challenge Cup out of the way first of all, which will be a good way perhaps of reintroducing the sport. And as we know with the Challenge Cup, the crowds aren't great because everyone has to pay to get into them. So that might be a way of getting that out of the way. And of course, we don't have to worry about refunding season ticket holders or whatever. We need to work out what we're doing with the Challenge Cup. Of course, that doesn't include every team, because some have already been knocked out. But
I think the Challenge Cup will become a midweek. I think they'll play the quarterfinals and the semi-finals midweek. I think they'll have to do that because if the Super League comes back, and we all know the clubs are going to want to play as many games as they can, you cannot have 2 weekends of the season whereby, what will it be, 8 and then 10 of them aren't, 8 and 10 of them aren't playing. You can't do that. That's a weekend loss. So I think it will become a midweek quarter-final and semi-final. I think the final will get its standalone date, but it's going to be, and even then, it might be like the FA Cup final now. We still have Premier League games going on around it, but the Challenge Cup gets its own day on Saturday. So I think I don't think that'll be the way we come back because I think they'll want if one team are playing, they'll all want to play.
The only way we could come back with the Challenge Cup is that as you say, economically, it makes sense. It's not included in anybody's season ticket. It's probably likely to be broadcast on the BBC, which will give us a bigger audience than we'd get on Sky. It's possible you could play even the remaining games as double or triple headers all over the course of one day. That might be a way back in, that you could play some games over a short period of time with nobody in the stadium.
What we're hearing about the final, Phil, do you think the date will move, or will we still be playing to that final date? When is it? July? Is it this? I forget the date.
Yeah, middle of July, and that's a worry because again, I don't think you can. You got to build up to the final. You got to promote the final, and that is a game that you do have to play with an audience. So I think that's going to have to be pushed back. The RFL, which is another consideration in all of this, has to generate some income this year, irrespective of whether we'd had this crisis or not. And the only two ways it was really going to do that was through the semi-final triple header and the final of the Challenge Cup, which they can't determine who's going to be in it. Therefore, they don't know how many people are going to turn up. But that is a guaranteed amount of money that they will have budgeted for, and a test series that looks increasingly like it isn't going to happen. So I suspect that the initial discussions of have the Challenge Cup final on the date that the grand final would have been at Old Trafford, and maybe have the grand final at Tottenham Hotspur, where we would have had a test match.
That would be amazing, by the way. I think that would be an amazing end to the season.
Well, that makes sense. That all makes sense. And if you could then still have even a pared down Ashes series, maybe at the end of November into early December, with maybe not even all the top line Aussie players coming, because clearly they keep telling us they could pick 3 or 4 teams of equal strength. So I'm sure they could bring over a side that was genuinely representative of the quality of their competition. And if we could find a venue to play that, because obviously we're back into the realms of where would be available as opposed to where we booked, then I think that's probably a best case scenario that we should be looking at now.
Having watched that concert last night on TV, and what a depressing 2 hours that was, full of earnest musicians playing really, really depressing songs. You're thinking, we're in the middle of a crisis, we've got a smile on our face, and perhaps at the end of the season, if we do have some kind of, if the Aussies don't want to come over, some kind of all-star game or something and give all the money to charity or something, or some of the money to charity, because we need to make some money. And finally, of course, now we're looking for a venue for the Challenge Cup final. If we played earlier, maybe we can play it at the Odsal Stadium, because at least then we own it and we can make all the money there and have double and triple headers, and everything will finally be at Odsal, as everyone has wanted for years, he says facetiously. 1 million people today have been furloughed, say the government. So that's a lot of money the government is spending on that. 1 million people who will have at least 20% of their wages lopped off for the next coming weeks and months. There is less money sloshing around in people's accounts who don't have savings.
Rich, I don't know quite where you're going here. I just want to jump in here. What do we? You might have been going to make this point anyway, but I feel you might be going to make another one. What do we make of the fact that Super League players and I guess Championship players to follow are going to be getting a pay cut? And a lot of people were kicking off at the weekend, saying, "Well, that's not fair. You can't do." It's my understanding, I think, as it was shown in Matt Shaw's piece in the League Express, is that there's an agreement between the clubs that players can't leave. A lot of people don't like that and say, well, if you're not getting paid your full wages, you should better go where you want. But what do we think about that?
Well, this is a point mentioned by Daniel, who's a Bulls fan. He says, thoughts on the story today about clubs agreeing not to sign anyone who takes legal action against a pay cut. Everyone needs to work together, but threatening to effectively end careers unless they agree to cuts is poor. Hope all are safe and well. Well, as well as we can be, Daniel. It's a tricky one, isn't it? It's an interesting situation because the players have signed those contracts in good faith, but unfortunately, the money's not coming in to necessarily honour them.
It's a potential Bosman, I think, for Rugby League, that if any player felt that he was being excluded because he refused to sign an agreement with one club, which effectively made him a free agent, and another club came in and took him, then I'm not sure that that's a legal position.
We've not had it in the football, though, Phil, have we? We've had none of this talk in the football.
No, I suspect that this is a non-issue at the moment as well, because you're assuming that some clubs will have extra money to sign players at the drop of a hat in a salary cap sport. So I'm not sure there can be too much change at the moment. If all the players sign that they agree to take a wage cut, then it's an idle threat that probably doesn't need to be part of the debate and the discussion.
I must admit, I thought that. I think, look, the players have got to realise this is for the greater good of the game, and they're going to have to suck it up. Like Rich just mentioned, you get furloughed at work, you're losing 20% of your income straight away.
The thing about being furloughed is everybody who is being furloughed is signing a form that they agree to the terms and conditions of the furlough. That's part of it. That you have to lodge that with your PAYE provider. And I think that would mean that that's a legally binding contract that under these circumstances, for however long they last for, that is the whole idea of a furlough, is it ties you to your current employment. So I think to say, if somebody is quite at liberty to say, I'm not prepared to sign it, I think they can adopt that position. Now, whether another employee wants to pick them up, I think that would reflect very badly on the potential club that wanted to sign them, rather than saying we all agree we're not going to sign you. I think you don't need to say that. I go back to the Israel Folau situation. The NRL clubs didn't need to put anything in writing amongst themselves that they weren't going to sign him. There was a tacit agreement around the table that they wouldn't, that they didn't want him in their competition for whatever reason, because they felt that it would harm the competition and the reputation of it. And it wouldn't necessarily benefit one side above another, because reputation was more important. I think, again, you don't need to go public with stuff like this. You just have to have the 12 owners or chief executives sat around the table and say, look, when this happens, as a gentleman's agreement, we will not poach each other's players. If a bid doesn't come in for a player, it's not an issue.
Interesting times. I'm sure I'm sure some players are not happy, but everyone's in the same boat, aren't they? This is the problem. Everyone's in this difficult situation, and part of this is where is the money going to come from? Obviously, people have got season tickets. You would suspect that the majority of supporters will have written that off at the start of the season, but we're now in a point where people will have lost work, lost their incomes completely, perhaps, and are looking for any crumbs of money they can get back. And we now have the idea, and here's Dom on Twitter, who says, I don't understand the pay-per-view option. Just how many fans do they think will pay £5 per game to make that viable? Doesn't the fact that we've never had numbers released for the pay-per-view international games give alarm bells? It's not, I mean, this is cheap. This broadcasting is cheap, but you're not paying to watch this. Although if you want to send us some money, please do so. This is cheap.
Send me a chair. I need a chair. I apologise for watching. I've moved about 5 times. I've made the schoolboy error of hiding, because obviously I've got a dog at home and he makes a lot of noise. I thought, you won't want to listen. I'll go hide up in one of the bedrooms, and then realise there's no chair, no desk, and I'm very uncomfortable. So I apologise to our listeners and viewers. I'm moving around all the time.
I just want biscuits. Don't worry about money.
Yeah, where's the biscuits? Where's Brian?
Is he being furloughed?
Who knows what he's doing these days? Mark, it's not cheap to broadcast a game of rugby league on the telly. They have cameras and people who do all various different things, and there's lots of equipment involved. Yes, you can do it cheaper, but you are going to lose the quality. If people are paying money, they're going to...
And therein lies a problem. Look, from a selfish point of view, do I hope the scheme takes off? Yeah, because there's a chance that hopefully I could get some more work out of it. But you also realistically have got to look at it. I think there are a lot of holes in the plan, a hell of a lot of holes in the plan. And it's not being negative by pointing those out. It's actually going, well, actually, I would like this to work, but we need to look at A, B, C, and D. And I think those are things. And you mentioned, people mentioned there were never any figures given on that pay-per-view, because quite clearly the figures weren't good enough, were they? We've seen from the figures on our league that is free. They're not good enough, really. They're not. If you were going to be charging for that, those figures are not good enough to make a significant profit. Now, some people will say, well, you might, you've got Wigan, Leeds, St Helens, Cass, whoever involved, the figures will go up. Yeah, I get that. That may well happen. But their coverage comes at a cost. Those costs, I think, have been vastly underestimated by the people that have given us figures. And even at those figures, you still need to sell a hell of a lot of pay-per-views to cover those costs. Now, the costs are going to be higher than that. It's doable, very doable, but a lot of holes. Like season tickets, for instance, get it free. How many people do they think are going to pay? You mentioned, look, people have just lost their jobs. They've lost 20% of their income if they've been furloughed. There's not too many people in a better position than they were before all this started. So we're all at some point, we're a bit down on this money-wise. I just think I don't want to say pie in the sky. I think there's some merit in it, but it's like, how do you justify, for Leeds to put one of their games on pay-per-view? Say Leeds Saints, I think that was going to be the last game before they got called off. So Leeds Saints, assuming Sky, A, don't want to cover it themselves, and B, are happy to just give the rights away, which everyone seems to think they will do. So they give it away. Leeds need a hell of a lot of money out of that game to play that game behind closed doors. They would lose hundreds of thousands, I would guess, in corporate income. And getting 30,000 on pay-per-view sales is not going to cover that. And I just don't see the merit in that. To some clubs, that may well be an income that they're happy to take. To clubs like Leeds and Wigan, I don't think that would be sufficient at all.
I mean, I defer to the two of you gentlemen as experts in how you do this, but I just think, as you've outlined, there are three potential flaws to this. And what people need to realise is this isn't a negative aspect of saying we shouldn't do it. We've always been realistic. We're trying to put forward the fact that if you sell the idea that something's going to happen and people get very excited, we're going to have a club in New York. Everybody gets very excited, buys the merchandise. We haven't yet come up with a mechanism how we would include that club in what we've already got. So it's all very well jumping on the bandwagon of saying it's great, when do I see them play? We haven't got to that yet. The same with pay-per-view for me, that clearly when people like Tony Smith are looking at the prospect and backing it, it's got to be worth looking at. He's somebody I have an absolute huge amount of time for in anything he's ever done for Rugby League, and he has as wide a perspective on all things as anybody I've ever met in the game. So if he's looking at it and trying to evaluate whether this is a way out, we're not here to say don't bother. And he'll be aware of it as much as anybody. There are three issues that you've just highlighted. One is, how much does it cost to produce it? Because when people are paying for something, it can't be one fixed camera in a field. Mm-hmm. Secondly, who is going to watch it? Because the audience traditionally has been ourselves. So we're appealing to the converted. Now, the problem with the converted, as you brilliantly pointed out, is we've never been under more financial pressure. So we're asking people who are being really severely struck at the moment economically to shell out more. So they may have already bought a season ticket. They might already be subscribers to Sky. We're now going to ask them to pay something else to watch not their team. So again, you've got to take that economic into it as well. I think the third thing is, who owns the rights at the moment? The rights are owned by Sky. And if anything is going to be pay-per-view, they're going to want the value of them.
And also, Phil, we mentioned this 5 weeks of solid football. Well, after that, there's going to be 6 weeks of no football. Exactly. So they're going to want everything on then, aren't they?
And that's what we were saying earlier, that actually if we reposition ourselves to play when football has finished, and they can cram in as many games as they want behind closed doors, they'll all be on Sky. We put our players into a pre-season then, so that when we come back, they're all fit and raring to go. And then we go with does Sky want to put as many games on, or do they want to have a pay-per-view red button element so that they can get some of their investment back that they've lost? I mean, let's face it, we furloughed our Sky payment at the moment because we're not getting live sport. We're not in the fortunate position where we can afford to keep Rupert Murdoch going. We just want to make sure that when it comes back, we'll try and find the wherewithal to reconnect to being a Sky subscriber and watching our Rugby League again. If they were to say, we're going to have a pay-per-view element, do you want to top it up and it'll be a rugby-based channel? And that way we can come up with a new television deal for the sport at the end of next year. I'd sort of want to support that at the moment. I also don't see how clubs in the Championship and League One benefit from Super League games going pay-per-view, because it's all very well saying we'll have a button where you can say who your team is and they'll get a proportion of the money. That proportion will be so small that it actually will not benefit those clubs in the Championship.
I know a couple of people. Yeah, I know a couple of people I've spoken to within the game and said, look, there's obviously the cost of producing would come off anything that was made. There's VAT obviously payable on that. That comes off what goes to the clubs. Would Sky want a percentage? If they're going to give their products away, and we're assuming they're going to give that product away for free, or are they going to want 20% of the take? All of a sudden, you've got to sell a lot of tickets, a lot of pay-per-views before anyone's making any meaningful money. Now, some people say, well, if you get 100,000 people paying a £5 to watch a game, that's £500,000. And that, in ideal world, would be brilliant. But is that going to happen? And without picking on clubs and naming clubs, but there's some games on Sky we see and I go, oh, I don't really fancy watching that. You know, we will if it's the only thing on. So, but if there's other things on, you're not going to pay additional money to watch it, are you? And I think that's the problem.
I think it's the additional money. I think we will watch games on Sky that perhaps don't involve teams that we're the most interested in, because we effectively have already paid for it with our subscription. I think if you're then saying we would like you to pay some more, and we've got to be realistic, there aren't a load of football fans who support Tottenham Hotspur thinking, oh, if it's only a £5 to watch a game of rugby league between two teams I've never heard of, I'll gladly throw it into the, you know, it's not going to happen. We have to have an awareness of who we are and where we are. And whilst it is a generator of some income, will it be enough to A, cover the production costs, and B, actually generate money for the clubs themselves that are playing, and also the other clubs in the food chain that don't have the ability to have a pay-per-view?
I almost think there's a danger that you're giving away your product to try and raise some money, but in the end you end up giving it away for too cheap, and I think that's what they're in real danger of doing. And you know, look, let's use BT as an example. They've got the Champions League and the Premier League. I could pay if I wanted to have BT and watch more football. I don't pay. I'm a football fan, but I refuse to pay. I pay my Sky. That'll do. I get enough games on Sky to watch. I don't need to pay any more. Their audience figures are massive, are they? And that is the elite competition, both domestically and in Europe. They've got the elite competition. They can't get people to pay for it. And I think there's a word of warning there. Look, I like the idea. I can see the thinking behind the idea. I don't see how it works in practice. That's my worry at the minute. And I'd rather, there's a lot of talking to be done and not a lot of time to do it in, I think.
Well, the problem is that in rugby league in general, regardless of anything, whenever anyone comes up with an idea, whether it's a good or bad one, it's just accepted as fact straight away, it seems, by many, without actually poking into any of these issues. And you see last weekend, oh, right, we're doing pay-per-view now. Oh, it'd be a great success with no actual analysis or thought about what it will be or not. And we don't know how much it's going to cost. People can say a fiver, but, you know, I've said before, I think the Sheffield Steelers ice hockey team charge £15 for their webcasts, and people must watch them, otherwise they wouldn't do them. So how much are you going to ask people to pay on top of what they've already paid, on top of buying season tickets, on top of buying our special shirt we've got out now for this, that, and the other thing, which every club's doing, because they have to make money, and there's nothing wrong with that. You can only go to the same people and that same well of money so often. We know there are blindly loyal people out there who will just spend every single penny on
but I wonder, Rich, is like Phil's mentioned, and we've all said, if you could turn out a Sky and say, look, we'll give you a month of game. We'll play a game every day for a month. But in return, we want, instead of, I don't know what the clubs get, 20,000, whatever, want a little bit more. Is that the way that they get their money back for playing behind closed doors? I don't know. But that, to me, would have more merit, getting the money direct from the broadcaster rather than relying upon the goodwill. And, you know, then you've got, with the goodwill, it's got to work. A lot of people use our league. It doesn't work properly when a lot of people want to watch something. So you've also got to set up another platform. That's going to cost you more money. It's fraught with danger. And as you said, once you start asking people to pay for it, there's an expectation. We get away with doing our show as we do every week because people don't have to pay for it. If they had to pay for it, they'd moan about everything. And that's your right, I guess, as a consumer. If you're not happy with the product you're buying, you don't buy it again, do you?
I think the other thing as well is that it goes right back to the beginning of our discussions today, and that is, what do we want the sport to look like going forward? And you shouldn't be asking people like us who are fans of the sport, and if Castleford played Warrington at 2:00 in the morning on the moon, we'd find a way of either watching it live or getting a stream of it because it's in our blood and we love it. The people you should be asking are those who only have a tangential interest in our sport, because they're the ones that you need to actually pay money to make this work. So if you do go to an avid football fan and say, look, football's not going to be on for 5 or 6 weeks, we're going to offer you rugby league as an alternative. Who do you want to watch? And if they say, "Oh, you got a team in Toronto? I'd love to see, you know what? Then this Sonny Bill guy, I've heard of him. I want to watch that." You know, you got to actually tailor your sport to what your non-aficionado audience want to see, because that's the only way you can build it. If they want to watch big city teams that they've heard of rather than teams that they haven't, if they want to watch the most attractive team and they happen to be called the Tigers and they're the Green Bay of our sport, that's great. But we have to sit down and actually work out what it is that people who aren't fans of the sport will want to pay for. And I don't know how you do that. It's a very dangerous gamble to say people will do it if you haven't done that research first about what it is they actually will pay to watch.
We need to promote the stars of today on social media rather than going back into the archives and digging out clips of, and he's the obvious example I always use, Rangy Chase, because the RFL use him all the time. There's no point promoting a player who plays in the third tier when we've got superstar players doing superstar things in the top division. And I know there's a split between the two, but regardless of, if we promote Tom Johnson's tries, it benefits the whole sport, not just Super League or the Rugby Football League, but we don't do that at times. So what do I know? And one thing I will say is, in terms of how many people are going to pay to watch these games on a channel which is available to many people, because I think just about everyone's got free sports now, unless you've got a very old Freeview box, probably an ITV digital box, which you didn't watch the football on, and that's why they went bust. The fact remains that in the last, well, there's 2 Rugby League magazine programs on there, and both get lower viewing figures than people riding bulls. You know, that's and repeats of old cricket. So
I'm told marbles is the big thing these days.
Yes, I was watching it on YouTube the other day. It was superb entertainment. So we need Rugby League marbles and Rugby League Subutio, which people still don't believe exists. If we're playing a game a day, then how many games the teams going to play a week? Player welfare a big issue. Gary Hetherington and Phil Clark says Lee. Don't think it's a player welfare issue. Phil Clark upsetting lots of people last week, which I found very amusing. Some people who should know better. They didn't play 3 games a week for sure. Joe Philbin, though, he came out and said he plays 3 games a week easily. And I think Scully sent me past. He hated training, loved playing. There's no right or wrong answer on this, is there? Or there probably is a right answer, but not everyone's going to accept it because we live in strange times.
Well, it's interesting. Where's the players' union on this one? What is the player? I think we heard Stevie Ward say he didn't think it was in the players' best interest to be playing 3 games a week every week. You know, it's an issue. It's an issue, and especially when you're asking them to take a pay cut. You know, are they going to do that? But are the players strong enough? Is their voice strong enough where they go, "No, sorry, we're not doing it"? I don't know. I thought Gary Hetherington. You know, I spoke to him last week on TalkSport 2, and he said it's not a player welfare issue. I'm sorry, but I think it is. I think the players, you know, they put themselves through so much, and, you know, we keep talking about concussions and stuff like that. There's a bigger picture here, and we've got to be careful about that, I think.
I think there clearly is a welfare issue, and the first thing we've got to do is define welfare. And I think Gary's view of it, and I wouldn't want to put words in his mouth, was that we need to play these games. There's an economic necessity. I don't think anybody would argue with that. I think to then equate that with whether it damages the players physically and mentally is a completely different issue. And I think that's where Phil Clark and Brian Carney fell out. I just don't think you can announce we're going to play more games a week without actually saying how you're going to do that. And we sort of briefly touched on it when we were last recording our podcast. I think the first thing you've got to do is say, well, we're scrapping reserve grade for the rest of this year. You know, every club will need to have access to all of its players if we're going to play more games. We're going to scrap dual registration and loans for the remainder of this year. Now, that's going to have a massive impact on some clubs in the Championship and League One. But clearly, if Super League clubs are playing 3 games a week, they're going to need access to the players that they're currently loaning out to other clubs.
And also, Phil, in fairness, if you turn around to the teams at the bottom and say, excuse me, none of you are going to get relegated, then they might be in a position to say to those young lads, well, hey, you can play on Wednesday, whatever.
Absolutely. And I think you also need to do that we hinted at, again, the last time we were sort of skating across the surface of this issue. Firstly, you might have to put a quota on the number of games each individual person can play. So, you know, a Tommy Makinson can only play 2 out of the 3 games every week. That's the coach then has to decide, you know, when he wants to bring a younger player in or which he deems to be the games that his team need their best players out there. I think that becomes a skill in itself. And I think you also need to look at things like, I don't know, perhaps there is a case for saying that you change the actual rules of the sport. And this is something that Brian McDermott touched on when he put out his statement, that, if we're going to bring in 3 games a week, do we play for 60 minutes instead of 80 minutes? That's not about devaluing the product. In some respects, if you only have 60 minutes to win a game, it's actually a more intense game rather than a less one. It's a better watch. It's a higher standard. But what you're doing is saying that last 20 minutes, which takes more out of the players than any other part of the game, it's preserving them for another game in midweek. Or you might look at saying, well, at the moment, we have a limited number of interchanges and a certain number of substitutes. But for the remainder of this season, where we all realise that we're going to have to play more games in a shorter period of time, we have a bench of 10. Any one of whom can come on, depending on the injuries at any time in the game. So we might move to unlimited substitutions if we've got midweek games. All of those things, I think, need discussing at the same time as just agreeing that it isn't a player welfare issue. It absolutely is. So let's mitigate against that by making sure every club has enough players to cope with 3 games a week. And then there's no argument that having 3 games a week is an issue. So I think we sort of gone about it, said it's got to happen. And we've all gone, yeah, economically it might have to happen, but how do we make it happen? And I think, all of that could be put into a package that says it might just be for this year, but actually there might be some things going on there where we say, actually, it's got a benefit beyond this year, and the game could look faster and more entertaining and appeal to a younger audience if we did have shorter games. Who knows? Let's try it. Let's throw it all in the mix. Let Tony Smith have a look at that one as a coach of esteem.
Some clubs are going to need some more chairs to fit all these subs on, because some of these.
Can I have one of them chairs?
It's not like Leeds where they've got big, lovely new stadia full of staff and everything. I think we're towards the end of everything. England's Sean Wayne has appointed new people ready for the non-test series against Australia coming up. Andy Laston, Paul Wellens on the coaching staff, and Colin Maskell, as the team manager. And it seems that they've gone down the route of bringing in someone who obviously has a rugby league background, but he's obviously had a career outside of the game, so to speak, so has a knowledge of the real world in that managerial position, whatever that entails, because no one's really quite sure. Yeah,
look, we all know Maskey. He's a top fella, and he's been a player himself, so he'll know what the players want and what they need, and he's had a job in outside business, so I don't think anyone's got an issue with him coming in. Paul Wellens is highly regarded by anyone and everyone that's ever met the guy. Again, we've no issue with that. And Andy Last, I guess, is the surprise one. I think if you'd have given us a list of 10, probably Andy wouldn't have been on it. But Sean Wayne obviously has seen something that he likes in him. I think you've got to trust Sean to get it right. He's gone for his own team. Sean's his own man. He clearly trusts Andy. You wouldn't have brought him in otherwise. And he has got international experience, Andy, hasn't he? He's been to the World Cup, I think, with Scotland. Is that right? So he's got pedigree there. He's Super League. He watches Super League every week. The proof will be in the pudding, won't it? Sean's picked his team. Let's hope it's a successful one.
Sean was always going to pick his name, and I think he was always going to distance himself from anybody who'd worked with or alongside Wayne Bennett, because he wants this perception that he's doing it completely differently. You can see that with the media work he's already done. He wants to be affable and upfront and out there. And I just feel a bit sorry for somebody like Danny Ward, if I'm being perfectly honest, because I just think Danny was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And he clearly is an aspiring coach with a lot to offer. It'd be a terrible shame if the only thing he ever gets to put on his CV was he was an assistant to Wayne Bennett in one of the poorest tours that Great Britain ever went on. I just wonder, and I'd be very interested in your opinion, does this put pressure on Hull? They're in the bizarre situation where they sacked their coach the week before, knowing that the game would go into a lockdown. They appointed Andy Last on a temporary basis to fill in for Lee Radford, and he's already been given a huge endorsement by the national coach saying how much he thinks of him and what a great job. Does that put pressure on Hull? Do they now have to say, well, Andy, you better be our man if the England boss thinks that you can do a job for him? I don't.
I'm a believer in when the coach gets the sack that his assistant should go with him. So on that basis, I'd say no. But From what I know of Andy, he's very diligent, does his job very well, and I don't think he'll get the big gig yet. Not at Hull. I think Hull is probably the wrong club. I think Hull fans would maybe demand a bigger name, someone outside that's proven head coach. I think they need a winner. I think they need a winner in there to turn them into winners at Super League level. So we'll see. But I would have thought it'd be maybe the proviso of someone coming in is that they do keep Andy there, maybe with a view to him taking over further down the line.
Maybe Sean Wayne doing both jobs.
Yeah.
Before we finish, is there anything else we need to mention before we wrap up things up?
I'd just like to say thank you to all of the people that are subscribing to 4020 at the moment. Can't
you leave that? Just leave that up, Rich. Can't you still tape it to your head?
Tell you, my colouring in's getting better, isn't it?
It's almost between the lines.
You haven't even gone out of the lines.
I know. Well, I've been doing it the last 3 weeks.
From all of us, a big thank you to all the people that are supporting the mag. Clearly, we want to keep bringing it out. We think it's perhaps not just important to give people something to read, but obviously these are times that need chronicling. It may be something that has never happened before and may never happen again. So we can only do that if people support us, and just been really heartened by the number of those of you who are subscribing out there. So thank you for that, and it is appreciated.
Yeah, I'm off. Sorry, Rick. I'm going to go buy myself a big bookcase and loads of books to pour it to make me look really clever for next week.
Well, I should have put the 4020 magazine printed up on the wall behind me. I'll do that next time. Sadly, my Border TV reference got cut out this week, but this month. But I'll try sneak one in last week. At least in this month's issue, there's a great reference to Tom O'Connor. What can I sneak into next month's issue remains to be seen, because there's no sport on television. And I am struggling at the minute, but I will find something. You, Mark, had Amy Hardcastle on your show last week on TalkSport 2. There's the guy at Rochdale or Alderman. I've forgotten his name, and I apologise for that. And someone will remind us in the comments. There are plenty of people involved in Rugby League who are doing stuff on the front line, be it in the health service or carers or delivering stuff for people who are doing far more important work than we. You know, there's going to become a point where we have a championship final, we have a grand final, and I hope that we can celebrate those people at those events, whether it's handing out the cup or whatever. I think that'd be a nice little gesture that doesn't cost anything. And it'd be better than having some bloody politician or something willing to recognise people of our own who are doing extraordinary things in extraordinary time, while most of us sit on our backsides at home doing what we're told to do.
Yeah, fair enough. We just hope everyone stays safe and keep obeying what you're being told to do. It is important. Don't start thinking we've got over the top of it. Keep doing what you're told to do. Keep staying healthy. Keep staying safe. Keep washing your hands and all that. But do it. And, we just want everyone to get through it. I think it's starting to hit home, isn't it, now? Especially for me with the Norman Hunter thing, someone who used to see every week, really, at work. It just brings it home a little bit. And, we don't want it getting any closer, do we? That's what I'd say.
And as you said earlier, he'll be back eventually. There'll be Rugby League. It'll still be here. It'll never go away.
Yeah, I think Keithley has claimed Captain Tom quite rightly. There's a Rugby League connection. He was stationed, he said the other day in one of his interviews, on Lawcombe Lane. There's your man who should present the Challenge Cup, all being well.
I scored a try at Lawcombe Lane once. Do I get to present it?
Well,
didn't raise 20 million for the NHS, so I'm doing so.
You can present the 1895 Cup.
Hey, I'll be there. Don't worry about that.
And we'll all be there, and they'll be there. The people listening and watching will be there. And we thank you for your support. And keep watching the videos, keep supporting people's podcasts, and make sure you put pressure on people to keep doing stuff. And unlike some club podcasts, we won't say anything controversial on this one about the Prime Minister. Phil and Mark, thank you very much. No one will understand that reference. That's the good thing. And we'll be back at some point in the future. Go buy the magazine and order that new book about Runcorn as well.